All right, thank you all for joining our session today. I am going to pass it over to David Erickson, Senior Vice President and Head of Outreach and Education at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, to open our programming. Thanks for joining us.
I was just recently consulting an expert on comic books. It was my friend Laurel's 7-year-old son, Silas, and he is the biggest fan of the comic book series. And he was explaining to me, he said, well, it's educational, but it's also like a story. And, that is, I just love that he just can't wait to get the next the copy of his mom is printing them out slowly, trying to kind of, as she's homeschooling him and back in California. And it's that excitement that when you see that in a kid, it just reminds you why a project like this is just so important, to sort of really spark the curiosity of young minds that are really thinking about how economics affects them, trying to understand how these bigger concepts sort of land in their household, in their neighborhoods, and to also think about how they might be sort of in charge of some of these tools that are out there, that they could be economists later in life, that they could sort of be work in the finance field. And so this is really a part of a larger strategy we have here at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to sort of think about ways in which we can spark that curiosity across the life course. I mean, from Silas's age all the way up to a PhD program in economics. And so we're just thrilled to have this event to share it with you. You're really in for a treat. Jen Kahn, who just introduced me, is the producer of the comic books. She's going to interview the artists Tom Bain and Paul Noth, who are going to talk to you a little bit about how they created this particular comic book series as well. This was a launch of an older offering. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York had comic books in the past, and you have a winning product when people keep on asking for it years after you have concluded it. So when we relaunched in 2017, we really really made this a real focus of our group's work, because of the kind of the value that it brings in terms of sparking that curiosity, as I was mentioning before. So this is the fourth book in this collection, the Story of Interest, and you've got the corresponding lesson plans with that, new activities, an upcoming Spanish translation of 2 books, The Story of the Federal Reserve System and The Story of Monetary Policy. And I'm just so eager to sort of jump into this conversation. So I'm just going to pass the mic back over to Jen. But before I do that, just please, I hope you can. We're trying to build a bigger community of people who are passionate about economics education, and we hope you will join us for subsequent events and for other products that we plan to launch soon. Things like a journal for high school students called the Journal of Future Economists, and some other offerings. So I hope to see you again soon. And thanks again, Jen, for organizing all of this. And I'll pass the mic back to you.
Great. David, thank you so much for your welcoming remarks. My name is Jen Kahn. I work in outreach and education at the New York Fed. Thank you to all. It's a pleasure to have you here for this virtual event. We know this is a very unique moment in the classroom, and we're so pleased that you are able to join us here today. We are looking forward to sharing more about the New York Fed's educational comic book series, how it can be used in the classroom, and also making sure that we have time to hear from you with your questions and your insight. In today's panel, I'll be introducing the comic book series and a bit about the creator before sharing more about some of our products and resources that we have for teachers. Tom, if you can hit that next slide for me. Before we get started, I have to say the views expressed are my own, do not represent the views of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York or the Federal Reserve System. All right, and with that, we'll kick it off. So a bit about the comic book series. The New York Fed's comic book series brings readers on an out-of-this-world journey to teach about basic economic principles and the Federal Reserve's role in the financial system. In 2017, as David mentioned, we relaunched the comic book series, and it was created to create a friendly educational resource to help spark curiosity and raise awareness of careers in economics, finance, and STEM-related fields. This series, which was created for middle school, high school, and introductory college students, includes a suite of independent learning resources. So as David mentioned, we have 4 comic book titles, 8 lesson plans, 2 activities, 1 museum exhibit, 1 Spanish translation, and a few more on the way next week. So you should be receiving about that email soon. So we're really excited to share the background and the creation of the project with you here today. On our panel, we have 2 of the creators of the series, my colleague Tom Bain, author and illustrator, and independent cartoonist Paul Noth. Tom and Paul, before we get started today, I'd like to have you share a little bit about yourselves. If you can tell us what you do, what did you study, perhaps when you were in school, and what drew you to this project. Tom, will you take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And hi, everybody. I'm Tom. In college, I majored in fine arts and animation. And prior to joining the New York Fed, I worked in television and advertising, some freelance corporate projects. Those led to some work in the education field, and then that has since brought me to the work that we're doing at the New York Fed. Currently, I'm on the outreach and education team, primarily working on the art and design of the educational materials that the bank produces, most notably the comic books that we'll be discussing here. I have to say what drew me to this project. Well, it's been a lot of fun, but maybe more importantly, these are the types of learning tools that I wish I had had access to when I was in school. I can remember in elementary school and middle school there being songs we would sing for math and fun science videos and stuff like that, but it was back then sorely lacking in lessons that were engaging on economics. So being able to be a part of getting these out there has been pretty satisfying, gratifying work. So
thanks, Tom. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do? What did you study? And how did you get involved? And what drew you to this project?
Sure. Thanks, Jen and Tom. I'm a cartoonist mainly, and also an author. In school, I studied creative writing and literature, and I always just did cartoons for fun. But professionally, those were the first things that clicked for me. For the past 15 years, I've been one of the regular cartoonists for the New Yorker magazine. I've written a couple of middle grade books and kids' picture books. Like Tom, I've been involved in the animation industry, both as a writer and a director. And what drew me to this project was I really have found that I enjoy doing educational cartoons and comics. It's a fun challenge for me to take ideas and turn them into stories, and that's sort of what we're doing here. And it's been a lot of fun. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. And all, as I mentioned, I'm Jen Kahn. I will be moderating today's discussion. A little bit about myself is I also work in outreach and education at the New York Fed. I oversee many projects relating to educational content and kind of creative interpretation of that information. And I work primarily as a project manager, producer, kind of hybrid, helping to connect all the people and logistics and many dots that are involved in projects like the comic and the museum. Growing up, I studied art and English in undergrad, and I have my master's in sculpture. So in my previous life, I was an artist, and I really love the experience of working with public art and taking complex ideas and distilling them into friendly and inclusive experiences. So I've worked with a lot of arts and entertainment and nonprofit organizations on various creative projects. But this one's pretty special because it teaches skills and specifically helps empower students to make their own economic decisions and hopefully pursue careers in the fields of economics and finance. So I'm really excited to be involved. All right, with that, we're going to transition into talking more about the comic book series. More often than not, people are really surprised to find that the New York Fed produces them. It's not typically what you think of when you think of the Fed as comic books or even central banking. But this series began actually all the way back in the 1950s. Tom, can I ask you to tell us more about the history and share a few slides?
Sure. Yeah, so it began back in the 1950s with a comic called The Story of Checks. That issue proved to be popular enough that more titles were produced, all told over a couple dozen or more throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, all the way into the early 2000s. Looking closer here, you see that as the publications progressed, some of the older issues would need to be revisited and updated. In some cases, the lessons contained in them would require new information in order to keep up with the advances in technology and banking practices. So you can see here at the top, the story of checks became, after a few iterations, the story of checks and electronic payments. Another instance in the 1970s, when inflation was at its highest in the United States, that topic found a way into a lot of the titles that were coming out around that time. And you can also see at the bottom that in the instances when the titles and subject matter was a little more evergreen, still the comics would be revisited and the artistic styles would be updated to keep pace with the evolving trends and tastes of their readers. So two of my favorite examples of that are the ones here, the story of banks and the story of consumer credit, whose styles went from, a classic sort of minimal look to the Saved by the Bell cruise that you see on the covers there. But by the 2010s, publishing of the comics had sort of reached a stopping point. The most recent comics at that time didn't really reflect current economic conditions. It had fallen out of style artistically, graphically, and weren't as relevant in the classrooms anymore. I can show one more example, and see here. Admittedly, this is maybe one of the more obvious examples that I could provide, but this is, it's easy to see why a modern student audience might tune this out. There's just so much text. One of the biggest challenges that we've faced with the new books is to not just fall back on copying and pasting textbook definitions into the characters' word bubbles, but rather to present the lessons as part of a larger overarching story in each book. So with that in mind, that brings us to the recently relaunched series. This was our premiere issue in 2017. When we revisited this, when we revisited the comics, the idea of reintroducing them into classrooms, it was clear that it was going to require a bigger overhaul than previous iterations. Like not only would we need new stories, new subjects, a whole new cast of characters, but we were reaching, a new audience, and with technology, not just in the banking industry, but technology in how information is received in the classroom, we were going to have to approach these from just new angles and stuff, and new variations on how the material can be interacted with.
Thanks, Paul. Or Tom, not Paul. Next question's for Paul. You ready? So when we started the relaunch of this project, I'm really interested if you can share, like, how did the overall story come to be? You know, I know we worked with a diverse team of people that included economists, educators, and artists such as yourselves, to come up with the slate of lessons and the storyline. Can you tell us how that overall story concept came to be, Paul?
Sure. Well, we drew a lot on the historical comics, but getting the feedback, having this big group of people to discuss it with, and all of these different experts in education and economists. One of the things we started talking about was to create a group of recurring characters that would appear, in all of the comics. So, this group of characters that you could sort of get to know and like, and the reader would sort of hopefully look forward to their further adventures in the next comic, and they could sort of develop as characters. We thought that would help make things more interesting. So in this first one we did, Once Upon a Dime, the educational objectives were we wanted to focus on sort of the basics. And so we began by introducing this world, Planet Novus, across the universe from us, and we also introduced this very diverse group of characters. And when we meet them, they have a system of barter. That's sort of the basis of their whole economy, is that they're trading. And it works okay sometimes, but it gets a little too complicated, and it can be sort of frustrating. So they come together as a community and invent a currency that can help them do everything more efficiently. And so we sort of follow the natural progression of that to where they create banks. And so then we start to learn about things like loans and interests and credit. And we follow that all the way to where they create a central bank that can sort of monitor the health of all the other banks. So this first one, we introduced sort of the basics, and we introduced the idea of a central bank. In the second comic, we wanted to explore that more and actually do a deep dive into the Federal Reserve System. And so here we, three of our favorite characters go on a fact-finding mission to planet Earth, sort of a field trip to find out all about the Federal Reserve System and its structure and its responsibilities and how it works, and just other, fun, interesting things about it. Like here they are, learning how to look at how to see which district a dollar bill came from by looking at it. And over the process of this, they get more and more interested in learning about economics, and they sort of become budding economists themselves, and they get more and more knowledgeable about it. And by the third comic, their expertise is kind of in demand in other parts of the galaxy where they're having trouble, economic trouble, and that's the story of monetary policy. We sort of focus in on monetary policy and how we can understand that. They're invited around to different planets, and we can. This was kind of cool because we could sort of compare how a healthy economy is working compared to a planet where they're having a problem with high inflation, and another planet where they're having a recession. And we can also sort of show how the tools of monetary policy can address these different problems. And not just address problems, but also how monetary policy can promote a healthy economy. Here we're sort of doing a sort of garden metaphor about how how these tools can help cultivate and grow and sustain a healthy economy. And then the fourth one, this one is just fresh off the presses now, is a story of interest and supervision. This one begins with a story about personal finance and sort of the basics of that. A character is learning how to make a budget and learning about the different kinds of interest and about responsible credit. And this sort of segues into a talk about responsible banking and about the the larger economy and the credit system, and we learn the importance of bank supervision and how a central bank can help, promote the safety and soundness of financial institutions and the whole economy. So that's sort of a brief rundown of the plot and educational objectives of the first four. I'm going to hand it back to Tom now, who I think has more to say about this.
Actually, Paul, I'm going to take it from here. I have a question for Tom, but so we are going to go back to Tom. So you are right in that. So Tom, the story features a cast of characters traveling the universe and working with others to solve economic challenges and help grow a healthy economy throughout all these different planets. I'm interested, how did you dream up this world? You know, you essentially created like a whole new universe with these different planets and characters. So how did you arrive at the setting and the design?
Sure. So early on in the creative process, we decided that an overly serious design, it might quickly grow stale. On the other hand, a design that was too simple or abstract and relied too heavily on charts and infographics, it could fail to engage the reader if it failed to illustrate the many nuances and complications that would arise in a society that's trying to solve their economic problems. So we wanted to show a large cast of people. If I could be given the presenter ball, I think Graham has it in his court right now. Oh, okay, great. So yeah, so we wanted, we wanted to show a lot about, this, like a large cast of people and how they are interconnected in their communities. So from a storyline perspective, we really wanted to avoid just showing humans reading and reciting textbooks. We wanted to see them in action. So this would require a setting, in this case, a universe, what we ended up on, big enough for them to exist in. We wanted, an array of small businesses, bakeries, grocery stores, mechanic shops, and, of course, banks and central banks and so forth that, and to kind of see that with all of that in mind, this sort of silly science fiction setting, it felt like a no-brainer when we arrived at it. We felt that this would give us the broadest range of creative freedom, I guess. We could show a diverse world of characters and businesses and jobs and situations, and in a less serious setting, we could focus the story on the lessons at hand. We could show examples of economic principles in action, but not have the stories be restricted to the rigors or history of a realistic context. So, these comics aren't intended to explain how to construct a spaceship or embark on intergalactic travel in the world. In these comic books, that stuff just already exists. And the sci-fi-ness of it all can just be taken as a given while being used as an amusing way to introduce the economic situations. Paul, did you maybe want to discuss the characters more?
Sure. Yeah, I agree completely with everything you just said, and I think that going into it, we wanted just characters that were fun and appealing, and that the reader could relate to right away, and just use those characters as sort of a vehicle to enter into the world of the story, and so to make these concepts, these economic concepts, relatable. As we can see in here how they're, these two characters, Flora and Glix, are starting an ice cream business. And so, we're sort of in their shoes as they're telling the story. And so if they're going to lose their business or have a problem with their business, that becomes important to the reader. So I think that was our goal, is just to have it be a fun world where things looked, that had a look and a style to it that was consistent, and just fun, interesting characters that people would want to hear more about.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Paul. So what do you guys see next? What do you see happening next in this economic universe? Where do you see all this entire kind of world going now that this world is created? How has it grown?
Sure. I can take that. When we first decided to relaunch the series, we set out to do 3 books. Approaching science fiction, a trilogy seems to always make sense, even if you end up with a trilogy of trilogies. But after getting to the 3rd, with little downtime in between, we started production on a 4th. So that's where we're at now with the one that just came out. On top of that, sort of but wait, there's more. Each of these comics are accompanied by 2 lesson plans, one for the middle school level and one for high school level. And whereas the comics can exist as a great entry point to generate an interest in economics and STEM subjects, and then these lesson plans, which come with detailed teacher instructions and multiple handouts for the students, these can provide a much deeper dive into the subjects that the books introduce. These lesson plans, they all adhere to the C3 framework. They meet national and state standards for New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, 2nd district in which we are. Following that, the next step that we took is we are currently translating the comics into Spanish. We have one available now. Our first book is out there, ready to be ordered, and then on the way in just a week from today, we're going to have the next 2, and then eventually the 4th will come along. As for where it's going and where it's been taking us, it adapts to the changing times, and our 2 latest products have been an activity book and activity poster. And these came about just in the last couple months, sort of as a response to the feedback we were getting and the situations of the new remote learning context and for this information. So the activity poster seen on the left, this will fold out to reveal sort of that landscape I showed earlier. So it's this and then a little bit more stuff. It's a little bit bigger of a scene. Sort of a Where's Waldo economic scenario that encourages students to look for examples of supply and demand and goods and services being provided, the circular flow of a local economy. This is actually based on an exhibit, a very large exhibit in our Museum and Learning Center at the bank, which is understandably currently closed at the moment, but we were able to adapt this so now it can be used in home and classroom situations. We also have the activity book, How Do We Get the Things We Want? This is a collection of economic activities that require much less teacher or guardian guidance than the lesson plans that accompany the comic books. This resembles more of a coloring book, activity book that you can just find at like any grocery store or whatever. It can be very easily done remotely, a little bit of instruction in the beginning, and then it's more or less self-explanatory using the same characters, same universe, mostly based on the same sort of lessons that are in Once Upon a Time, the first comic, and then a little bit of kind of like expanding that universe. So, and then as for how these can be used in the classrooms, I know that Jen knows a lot more about sort of how the hands-on experience has been going there and how teachers have been using them. So I will pass it on to her if she would be so kind to explain that.
I shall. Thanks. Thank you both. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from teachers, all across the country, not just the 2nd district, which the New York Fed serves, but, many educators have used these early stories for years. And as David mentioned earlier in his opening remarks, it's it's pretty incredible that we've been able to hear from teachers like over time, since even, obviously not since the 1950s, since I've been at the Fed, but for quite some time that, we've been able to hear from teachers about their interests. So when we launched the new series in 2017, they were very excited. We got a lot of feedback that people were able to see new versions available. And, in that feedback, it's also really interesting that we've been hearing back from like such a diverse audience of people. It's not just economics teachers, or one specific grade level. We recently did a call for teacher testimonials, which we open to all of you that are joining us here today. Feel free to email us if you'd like to share a testimonial of your experience with the comic, either in the past or in the future. And we heard back from teachers from a lot of different subjects. Personal finance, social studies, AP economics, even art teachers, which was near and dear to my art school heart. So it seems that they're not just being used, they're not just one specific niche, they're being used across all these different subjects, across middle school and high school students. So if you have an experience that you'd like to share, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you, and kind of add that testimonial to our collection. And also, as Tom mentioned, like this is especially helpful in this learning environment. These comic books and the series, the activity books are a great tool for independent learning, for STEM problem solving, for thinking, and also for the opportunity to have like a screen-free or digital activity. I'm on Zoom meetings all day. I'm really excited to, even though I've looked at the comic book on the screen for so many months since we've been putting it together for the last year, like having it in my hand there's something very like precious about it, and we don't always get the opportunity to kind of like hold something physically in our hands. So I wish I had it on hand to pull out and show you, but there's something really kind of special and intimate about looking at it and holding that paper. And we really want to kind of replicate that offline experience for students, or for those that are, more digitally engaged, like go ahead, just swipe through it. So neither of the activities or comic books, require any adult supervision, which is especially, extra valuable at this time. So it's really a great resource for students to kind of learn independently, think on their own, explore this new world, kind of engage with the characters, and maybe be inspired to pursue their own kind of study of economics. So it's been really great to hear from the teachers, and I know Graham is going to talk a little bit more about some of our programs, and David mentioned this at the beginning, but I really, really, really want to enforce that we want to hear from you. We are serving teachers and students and the general public, and we can make things that better resources for you with your feedback. So thank you in advance for engaging. All right, so now we're going to transition to the Q&A session. We're going to open it up in a minute, and I just want to kind of pause and orient you to the Q&A box that is down here on the bottom right. It might be kind of a pop-up arrow that you need to select below the closed captioning or perhaps above the closed captioning, but we're going to ask all people joining us today that you type your questions in here. Of course, we wish that you could I wish we were in person, and I wish we had a microphone and a reception afterwards where we can chat with you, but we're going to kind of leverage this technology and have you enter your question down in the bottom right. And while you're getting these questions ready, I just want to take a moment to pause and remind you that all of these resources are available for free on our website. You can see the website address here on our screen, newyorkfed.org/comic books. So you can screen grab it. You can also go to the newyorkfed.org and click on Outreach and Education, and you'll see the comic book image there. So we're really hoping that it's easy to find. And these, again, resources are free on our website. You can download them. Anyone on the planet can download them. And then also you can order classroom sets. Classroom sets come at $35 per classroom. We also offer household sets. Working in this remote environment, teaching in this virtual landscape, we want to make sure that teachers are able to order them virtually. And also, we just want to make sure that you're able to have a both digital experience online, but also a physical copy that can be delivered to both schools and homes. So don't hesitate to check out that website. We ship the comics pretty regularly, and there's a form where we gather your information to help ship it out to you. So we're excited to hear from you. Before I pass it over to my colleague, Graham Long, who also works for Outreach and Education and is an educator and a really important part of us creating this series of stories and activity books. He's really been a key advisor on us on how to connect with teachers and, quite frankly, just inspiring us to kind of think about things we hadn't thought about before. We do want to be sure to remind you at the end of this session, when your window closes, there's going to be an assessment. And it just has a handful of questions, about 5 or 6. And we really ask you that you please kind of complete this assessment. It should take you maybe 1 to 2 minutes. If you can just quickly go through it. It would be really helpful just to know how helpful it was, the information that we communicated to you today, to inform you about future programming. And this information will help actually inform future programming. So we are here to serve you, the general public, the teachers, the students, and that data will really help inform that. And also we welcome you to email us. Feel free to email us at newyorkfed.org or nyeconed at newyorkfed.org, and we hope to receive your feedback. So I hope you all have had time to input some questions into that inbox. That's going to take us through the next 15 minutes. If you haven't thought of a question yet, I empower you to speak up and ask that question. No question is too small. And I'm going to pass it over to our colleague, Graham Long, to take away the Q&A session. He's going to read these questions off for us. Thanks, Graham.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Jen. And I've got questions pouring in. So Tom and Paul, consider that in your answers. So we'll start with one in this era of, challenging collaboration, right, amongst students. So I'm just curious, and some of the teachers are curious about the collaborative process between the two of you. How did you work together on the script? Maybe different artistic styles. How did you blend those together? Can you talk briefly just about the creative process just between the two of you?
Sure. I think the collaboration between us really starts with the group and the team, because we have a great team of people, and we have partners who are economists and partners who are educators, and they give us a lot of feedback. And I think the first thing Tom and I are concerned with is, what are the educational objectives? Once we know that, we can build a story around it, and then Tom and I will just sort of bounce story ideas off of each other. And see what we like, and then we share it with Jen and the team and say, is this too out there, or is this okay? Does this work? And once we have a story we both like and characters we like, we divide it up. We divide up the story to write different scenes of the script. With the first one, we took our time in developing a style where we could both draw. We both felt comfortable drawing the characters, and that's very important in this. So we could both create pages. We could both write and draw the pages. Then eventually, we realized that for just in terms of the workflow to make sense, it made more sense for Tom to concentrate on inking the pencil pages that we both did, and for me to concentrate on the coloring while he did that. So it was a lot of trial and error, but I think we found a workflow that we're both comfortable with, right? Would you say that's right, Tom?
Yeah, and I think that with working with Paul, and both having a background in television animation, though our paths had never crossed before this project, we had similar, 1 degree, we had worked with the same people. It's a very small community in the New York animation world. So we sort of knew the process of like the brainstorming, how to craft a story, how to craft a narrative. A lot of times in advertising, you're getting like client notes that the cereal box needs to be on screen longer. And then, that didn't make it quite the leap for, when we were working with our research partners and they were like, oh, you need to explain this monetary policy thing a little, you really need to get this. And we could work on getting that information into the narrative early on, and then we sort of would plot it out, and that's where we were really able to approach it like a professional, animation production. I mean, that was my comfort zone, and it was able to be done that way. Yeah.
No, that's great. It's always interesting, especially for somebody who's not particularly artistic, to hear about that process. So thank you for that. The teacher in me is intrigued by this question. We've had a number of people asking, and you can answer both of these or kind of splice them together. Do you have to read the comics in order to understand them? Like, is it sequential? And then maybe as kind of a follow-up or in the same vein, are they designed to be able to pop in and out of? Like, in other words, could a teacher just focus on pages 1 through 17, get the gist and move on, or maybe focus just on pages 23 to 25 because they have a dynamite lesson for pages 1 through 12? Can you talk a little bit about how they're structured both sequentially as well as within the document itself? Just thinking about it, perhaps from an implementation teacher perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great question. I'm glad I can clarify on that. The books can exist on their own. They are fully sort of like self-contained lessons within them, and then within the book, there are different sections that they do focus on. There's no set one. And Once Upon a Time, it's sort of split into like 3 different story beats as the narrative progresses. Story of interest, the latest one is really blocked. It's kind of 50-50 down the middle, how that one is laid out. But they can totally be taken in bite-sized chunks. The through line of the characters is sort of just like an extra reward and way of keeping people engaged as the story progresses. But they absolutely can be piecemealed up and approached that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. There are little modular lessons inside of each of them that could be a lesson on its own. If you just want to concentrate on one thing, learning about, interest or something like that, there are definitely little modular stories within the larger story that could be used as their own lessons.
All right. Thank y'all for that. So I have a number of people in the Q&A are saying things, and it's great to hear, are giving little mini testimonials and talking about some of the topics that their students struggle with, right? I mean, I saw things like subsidies, which was something in my class I always hated having to explain to students. I was never good at just explaining it or coming up with a good lesson. Price ceilings, price floors, negative interest rates. I'm getting all of these things that teachers are, saying are a challenge for students to grasp. And so, I guess a question that came up that's very good is, what's an economic concept that you found most challenging to develop and to conceptualize and then to put pen to paper and document in these comic books?
That's a great question. I think that is where we like to focus in on, is what is the challenging part? What are the difficult concepts to understand? And that was on my mind. I remembered my AP US history class where we learned about the Fed and interest rates, and just like my brain just wanting to give up because there was just this, the complex idea of, of interest rates and how that related to economic problems. It was like, oh no, math has crashed into history now, and I'm sinking. So I remember when we were working on that, I was thinking about myself when we were working on in the story of the Federal Reserve, sort of explaining the mechanism for interest rates, and what we came up with this idea of a little lever where when interest rates go down on one end, economic activity goes up, and vice versa. So economic activity, and so it was just a helpful sort of visual that I think could help make sense of that, and we always are sort of looking for those. You might have another example, Tom.
I mean, for me, what comes to mind is just when we were working with the research economists and educators at the bank on the monetary policy issue, and myself, and I, not to speak for you, but I feel that we don't have a finance background. We arrived at at the bank through a different route, and so hearing them explain something and being like, this is the lesson, this is what we want to get across, this is, would be beneficial for students to know this. And the moment when it starts to click for me, and it always helps, like using the visual metaphor and stuff like that. And so sort of pinpointing the moment when it starts to materialize, and then putting that down, like holding on to that part. So and working it into a story, working to having the characters come to that realization themselves, or explaining to another character, as depending on the scenario. So yeah, for me it was the monetary policy issue was probably the one that required the most back and forth with our partners.
All right, thank you. With about 5 minutes left in our scheduled Q&A, we're gonna try to get 2 more questions in. So consider it kind of a lightning round here. I thought this one was interesting. Maybe as teachers think about integrating comic books or having students do their own comic books in the classroom. How did you balance, the idea of having, bright colors and, dynamic imagery to really draw students in versus having almost too much stimulation where it distracts from the educational purpose? How did you go about striking that balance?
I would say, we were aware of that early on. We wanted to both make it not too much of a overload of information, and then on the other hand, not just make it sort of like a waste of time and have it just be like a flippant little, anecdotal story. So really the process early on was, you just kind of map out where in the story things are going to occur, sort of like rising action, falling action, sort of rewarding scenes with a little bit of a joke if it's gone too long, too many pages or panels without a humorous section. And I feel like it, reached we reached a happy balance. Of course, other people I would love some feedback on that if they think that it is too overloaded.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the things that we were always keeping in mind is, because the concepts could be complicated, we had to keep things as simple as possible. That the simplest solution was always the best. The simplest design was always the best, because then we're not going to just overload the reader with too much information, and it won't distract. As long as the story feeds into the story flows into the educational objective, then we can just tell the story in the best way possible, and we'll get to that educational objective. So that's usually how we try to structure things.
All right, and our final question. So we're gonna, and this is a perfect question to sort of condense into an elevator pitch given the amount of time. So I'm glad that this one came up. A principal or a department chair walks in on one of our educators on this call today and looks at a copy of The Story of the Federal Reserve and sees it's a comic and turns to them and says, "Why on earth are you using comics in the classroom?" What's your elevator pitch? Why should they be using comics in the classroom?
Well, I would say, all due respect, can't you see they're using them? I mean, aren't they, you know, this evidence is right here. But, you know, I feel like this stuff, something like to get, you know, out of the textbook, you know, the textbook's not going away, but you're handed, you know, this like Jen, you know, said, this little special, precious kind of thing that you can get out, get away from a screen, you can interact with it. And it's very similar to what they, you know, in many cases will go home and do as a form of entertainment. And so there's a familiarity there that, you know, it's just like you know, another vessel to convey this information. And if it works and if it sparks interest, there's, you know, the more traditional, you know, forms of the, you know, material that they can get to.
Yeah, I agree. I think comics have a proven track record of being a good educational material that, you know, I think teachers are relying on them more and more. They sort of stimulate both sides of the brain. If you want, you're not going to be too overloaded with text information. You can also have images. In a way, the way that textbooks are structured, there's often a picture there because it just helps you process and retain the information. And it helps it just not be, you know, so rote, so, you know, so one note. And I think that it's, you know, it's, I know that I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I know there have been studies that show, you know, that it helps it helps people remember things, and it helps, you know, lots of my cartoons, you know, our textbooks have been licensed to textbooks because it's just, you know, it's nice to have a cartoon in this sort of, even if you're just doing a straight up textbook, now and then you'll have something to make it more interesting and to also help the student remember and show it in other contexts. So I think comics are a great learning tool.
I also think that there's a diversity factor, which is always important, particularly important in this day and age. And it gives students the opportunities to see all these different people participating, active in their community, participating in civics, participating in building their community, building their society, and making informed economic decisions. And you know, as Tom and Paul said earlier, you know, this is just specifically set on another planet to show a lot of diversity, a whole range of people working together to create solve these economic problems. So it's an opportunity to include more perspectives and inspire students to kind of pursue these careers and make their own informed decisions.
All right. Thanks to the three of you for insights into the creation of the comics, a little bit about potential implementation. You know, one thing that's been very heartening here manning the Q&A is the number of people who are providing testimonials of times that you've used them. Super grateful to hear those sorts of things. If you have one and would like to share it with us, please email it to us, you know, at the variety of email addresses that Jen gave you. You can always connect with us at nyfed.org/comicbooks, and all of our requisite email addresses are on there as well. If you want to follow up with us about how you've used them or ideas or things like that, we always want to hear from you. Some of you have asked about sort of outreach plans and the way we do our outreach. We appear at social studies teacher conventions and economics teacher conventions. We have contacts throughout New York City with community development organizations. And of course, if you go to that website, nyfed.org/comicbooks, educators can order a classroom set of as many of those comics as you want. You can literally sit there and click and get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different things delivered to you. Households as well. We've just opened this up to the households to be able to get 3 copies as well. So if you have friends who would like to do that, they have access to them as well. And so just as we kind of wrap up, one of the things that all of us at NY Econ Ed want to convey is how grateful we are to all of our educators. This is as we know, it's a very challenging time, right? And in terms of teaching and pedagogy and everything else. And so we're so appreciative of all that you do to keep your students educated and to keep your students engaged. And one of the purposes of this session was to try to get you a little bit more familiar with how these tools were created. Hopefully that insight will allow you to think a little bit more about, that's interesting. They structured it in this way. So I didn't think about, only using the middle pages, just something like that, just to get the juices flowing. So we hope that we've been able to do that for you. And again, we're so appreciative of all that you do in the classroom and for your students. So again, please don't forget to connect with us at nyfed.org/comicbooks. And thank you so much for your participation this evening. We really and truly appreciate it. Thank you.
And don't hesitate to complete that assessment. We really look forward to that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.